Ever wonder why educators teach jazz improvisation the way that they do? This might be a controversial video, but I'll give you a brief history of jazz improv and help you determine what type of learner you might be. Hi, my name is Jason Klobnak, and I'm a jazz trumpeter from Denver, Colorado that helps musicians find a better way to improvise. If you're looking for a quick jazz improv tip that will help your soloing, then you've come to the right place. Ask a jazz musician how they learned how to improvise, and you're probably going to get a variety of responses depending on their age. This is because the history of learning jazz improv has morphed over time. Now, this is strictly an opinion-based history formed off of what I've found, and not at all meant to be the definitive guide to jazz improv history. I want this brief video to be informative, to help you decide which way works best for you. So let's start with the era of the OGs. These were the men and women in the early days of jazz before big band. So we're talking New Orleans and Dixieland. These cats did not have Ebersol play-alongs or recordings that they could transcribe what their favorite players did. So how did they develop the first stages of improvisation? Well, this was the generation of embellishing the melody and quoting popular music. And if you think about it, that was the source of so many tunes. They would take the pre-existing melody and add anticipations, delays, upper and lower neighbor tones, runs, and so much more. Some of the masters of this era were Buddy Bolden, Louis Armstrong, King Oliver, Jelly Roll Morton, and a host of so many others. As an observation, one of the tools I noticed many musicians from this era using was the pentatonic scale. I believe that's because so many of the popular melodies across almost every culture are based around it. Okay, so back to the history of the improv thing. There's a few different quotes from young musicians asking these OGs what they were doing, and the resounding response was, use the melody as your guide. Whether you realize it or not, that's still great advice to this day. The melody helps you keep track of where you're at in the song. It can help you with phrasing and help you pick out great targets when soloing. But to a young or even an inexperienced improviser, it was left up to many different interpretations. As jazz history moves forward in time, genres expanded and how soloists improvise got more complex. Styles went from New Orleans to big band. Then big band gave way to bebop, bebop to cool, cool to hard bop, fusion, free jazz, and the lineage kept expanding. But what about how people learned how to solo? For decades, there were two main ways you learned. The first was getting out and playing, and this was either at gigs or at jam sessions. You could talk with other cats about what they were doing or hearing what they were playing. That also gave you a chance to try out your stuff. The second was through recordings, and this is because more were being produced as time moved forward. You could hear the use of chromatic targeting from players like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, the use of space and modes from players like Miles Davis and Bill Evans. Then you had technical prowess from players like Clifford Brown, Oscar Peterson, John Coltrane, Freddie Hubbard, and the list goes on and on. But you had to lift it from the records or talk to other musicians at jam sessions. The educational side of things, however, really shifted in 1967 when Jamie Ebersol released the first of many in his chord scale system, which was a scale option, or sometimes multiple, for every different chord type. Jamie built an empire around not just the method, but a vast play-along library. Around the same time, you had colleges like the University of Indiana with David Baker, and about a dozen others developing their programs at places like North Texas. Not all use the chord scale method, but it works great in academia because you can grade scales and their use objectively. Grading someone's solo or their improvisation, though, is subjective, and that's so much harder to grade. So this became the predominant method for teaching improv for many decades, and a lot of schools still use it today. There are countless books on scale studies, play-alongs on everything from vinyl, cassette, DVD to download. In today's landscape of learning how to improvise, there are just as many options in newer formats like blogs, websites, and of course, YouTube. This video could easily be hours long if I were to mention every teacher, their book, or method. So don't drop the hate comments that I didn't list so-and-so or your favorite teacher in this video. There are lots of great resources and teachers that span the spectrum of jazz improv history. A simple search will find teachers that will tell you to use the melody as your guide, those that will tell you to transcribe your favorite players, those that will tell you to learn hundreds of scales, those that will tell you to go play with others at jams or sessions, and still others that will guide you along the journey. And I like to think that's where I fit on this vast timeline. I've worked through, in various degrees, all of the options I previously mentioned. Some were helpful, and some were extremely frustrating and didn't work for me. Until I noticed something that interweaved between all of them. That became my journey, and I like to help musicians see it and hope that it brings them as much value as it did me. So you may be wondering, what is that something? Well, I noticed that my favorite players always seemed to be going somewhere, like they were aiming for the end of their lines. They were targeting their last notes. So that became my quest to see what they were aiming for and the various ways that they got there. Over almost a decade, this became the pillar to my method. Okay, so there's no playing example in this video where I'm giving examples over a popular chord progression, but I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment down below and tell me what type of learning style has worked for you, or the style that you think may work for you. Has using the melody as your guide been your success? What about learning all of the hundreds of different scale options? Drop your thoughts below. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that it has added value or benefit to your playing in some way. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and that bell that's right next to it that lets you know when another video comes out. And if you know any other musician that might find this useful, you can share it with them too. Until then, my name is Jason Klobnak, and I'll see you on the next one.